he will pay attention to the public mood. I think if massive demonstrations in Israel resume, which they plan to do this Thursday, and if millions come out, or over 500,000, 1 million, and call for his resignation and for a ceasefire and for the end of the war, he won't be able to survive much longer. I think public opinion, I don't think he cares much for Lord Cameron, unfortunately, but I think it's the internal pressure has to mount.
First, though, to Israel, which has rescued 2 hostages from Gaza following overnight airstrikes in Rafah. Now, the Hamas-run health ministry says at least 67 people were killed as a result of the airstrikes. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, has urged Israel to stop and think seriously as the southern edge of the Strip is overcrowded with civilians. Nomi Bar-Yaacov is a fellow at the International Security Programme at Chatham House. First of all, Nomi, do we know how the rescued hostages are? They were both men, I think, weren't they?
Yes, they're both men, and they're both reunited with their families, and they're both reported by the Israeli officials to be in good health.
Well, that is something. And it was obviously an incredibly difficult operation to get them out.
Yes, it's an operation that's been in the planning for an awfully long time, and they were held on the second floor of a building in Rafah, surrounded by dozens of armed Hamas combatants. And this is a sort of, from an Israeli military intelligence point of view, a big coup. And they said actually that hundreds were killed. I'm surprised you said only 67 were killed overnight, but the Israeli military at least is reporting that more than 67 were killed. They're saying over 100
Right.
Hamas combatants.
Right, OK. The people sheltering in Rafah, which is at the southern end of Gaza, really very close to the Egyptian border, they simply don't have anywhere else to go, do they?
No, the situation is extremely worrying. There are around 1.3 million, so about half of the population, or over half the population of Gaza, have been relocated multiple times from the north, from Gaza City, from Khan Yunis, from the entire Strip, right down to the border with Egypt. Rafah is on the border. And many of them living in tents, makeshift homes, very poor conditions. The Israelis have said that they would set humanitarian corridors for them and evacuate them to a strip adjacent to the coast on the southern front. But that has to be coordinated also with the Egyptians. The Egyptians have threatened to suspend the peace treaty with Israel, the Camp David peace accord, if anyone crosses, any of the displaced Palestinians, internally displaced, cross the border into Egypt. So there's tremendous tension around.
What we know from the likes of Lord Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, and the American President Joe Biden is that there are, to put it mildly, real misgivings about Netanyahu's strategy. Is there any chance at all that he will pay any attention to what they say?
I think it's highly unlikely. It's over 4 months that he's paying no attention to what they're saying, and he's been leading this war in a sort of very different way to what many had envisaged or hoped for. He's coming under tremendous pressure internally to step down. He's coming under tremendous pressure externally to reach a ceasefire, but he's not showing any signs of wanting to reach a ceasefire. He's showing signs that he wants to try to, in his words, have total, quote unquote, total victory.
If he steps down, well, it's over for him, isn't it? His political career is absolutely gone.
Well, it's not. He's not going to step down voluntarily. That's very clear. But he's going to be ousted. He's going to potentially end up in prison. There are 3 trials for very serious corruption that he's been indicted for. The trial's currently suspended because of the war. But it's very unlikely that when the war is over, he's going to stay in power. That's why he's continuing the war.
But are there any prominent dissenting voices within his war cabinet?
Well, the war cabinet, interestingly, is all comprised of 2 key members from the opposition, Gadi Eisenkot, who's one of them a former chief of staff, very, very vocal. The point is that if they leave, they are caught between a rock and a hard place, and they have been rumored to be saying that they would leave. But the problem for them is that they feel that they're in charge of the military operation, and they joined the cabinet in order to sort of do some damage limitation. Who knows what would have happened had they not been there? So it's
Right.
not within the war cabinet. There are two dissenting voices.
Right, okay. But what we also know is that so many more people would be incredibly vulnerable if a ground invasion takes place, not least, of course, the Israeli forces themselves. Are there any dissenting voices amongst the Israeli military leaders about the idea of a ground offensive?
No, not among the leaders, not among the Israeli Defense Forces, but the hostage families that are dead against it because they would like to see their loved ones come back alive, not in coffins. And there's tremendous pressure from them not to continue the war, and also from the opposition, but not from the military. The military looks at it as a military operation, and there are still 6 battalions, Hamas battalions in Rafah, that haven't been dismantled. Out or yes, trying to think how. So 6 battalions is quite a lot. 18 have been dismantled. Sorry, it's a total of 24. I was just trying to get the maths right.
Yeah.
So. And I think that's kind of why the military is keen to continue as long as they can secure the safe passage of 1.3 million, which sounds very unlikely.
But we won't ever, or Israel will not ever destroy Hamas, will it? It clearly has had a colossal impact, but the idea of the organisation will remain, and it will still have backers elsewhere in the world.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think anyone thinks that the movement will no longer exist, but I think the aim of the military is to ensure that the perpetrators of the atrocities on the 7th of October 2023, which were truly horrific atrocities, that they do not stay in the Gaza Strip, and that they no longer have a say in what's going on. I mean, they've actually said that they plan to kill them, and they're saying they're getting closer and closer and closer to them. They have found the place where they have been sheltering, one room after another, or one flat, they're sort of 15 to 20 meters underground, and they say they have evidence that that's where Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, the leader of the military wing that governs the Gaza Strip, that was the perpetrator, organizer of the 7th October massacre. So they're really after him and a few people close to him.
Well, I think we've established that Benjamin Netanyahu is not in the mood to listen to Joe Biden or indeed Lord Cameron. Is there anyone he will pay attention to?
That's an excellent question. He will pay attention to the public mood. I think if massive demonstrations in Israel resume, which they plan to do this Thursday, and if millions come out, or over 500,000, 1 million, and call for his resignation and for a ceasefire and for the end of the war, he won't be able to survive much longer. I think public opinion, I don't think he cares much for Lord Cameron, unfortunately, but I think it's the internal pressure has to mount.